The millionaire boasted, "My wife is surely a virgin." But on the honeymoon, he discovers that she was never innocent. The truth destroys him on the first night of the luxury wedding. What was love turns into a scandal, and the whole world is talking about it. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Eric adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time in front of the mirror of the luxurious restaurant The Obsidian. His fingers, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts and conducting complex negotiations, trembled slightly. This nervousness was new for him, who at 45 had already achieved more than he had dreamed of in his youth. The maitre d' approached with his usual discretion. "Mr. Parker, Miss Hannah just arrived." Eric took a deep breath, trying to contain the anxiety that had consumed him since he first saw her at the public library 3 months ago. Hannah crossed the dining room with hesitant steps, as if asking permission from the air itself to exist. She wore a light blue dress, too simple for this sophisticated environment, but it perfectly matched her delicate nature. Her eyes, the color of aged honey, scanned the room without really finding a place to settle. "You look beautiful," Eric said, pulling out a chair for her. Hannah blushed, a gentle flush that began at her neck and rose to her cheekbones. She murmured an almost inaudible thank you, her fingers nervously playing with the linen napkin. The sommelier approached to suggest wines, but Eric dismissed him with a gesture. He knew Hannah didn't drink, one more detail that intrigued and enchanted him. She was different from all the women he had met in his travels around the world, at his extravagant parties, in his life of calculated excesses. "How is your mother?" he asked, genuinely interested. Hannah raised her eyes from the menu she was pretending to read. "She's stable. The doctors say the new treatment might help." Her voice carried the weight of years dedicated exclusively to maternal care. Eric observed every detail, the way she held the cutlery with excessive delicacy, as if afraid of breaking them. How her eyes always averted when silence lingered, the way her small hands intertwined when she was nervous. During dinner, they talked about books, the only subject that made her eyes shine with true passion. Hannah worked as a restorer of antique books at the library, a job that seemed tailor-made for someone who preferred the company of yellowed pages to that of people. "Have you ever thought about writing?" Eric asked, noticing how she described even the age spots on parchments with poetry. Hannah smiled, a contained smile that barely touched her lips. "Sometimes, but I've never had the time or the courage." That answer struck Eric like a revelation. Hannah wasn't just shy or reserved. She was like a book that had never been opened, blank pages waiting to be filled with stories of their own. At the end of the night, when he accompanied her to the taxi, Eric made a decision that would change both their lives. It wouldn't be just another date, another story in his collection of fleeting romances. Hannah deserved more, and for the first time, he felt capable of offering something beyond the superficiality that had marked his previous relationships. "May I see you tomorrow?" he asked, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. Hannah hesitated for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, in a whisper that carried as much fear as hope, she answered, "Yes." The taxi departed, taking Hannah through the New York night, leaving Eric standing on the sidewalk with a certainty that both scared and fascinated him. He had found someone who, without saying almost anything, said everything he needed to hear. It was the beginning of something that neither of them yet knew how to define, but that was already beginning to transform them, silently. The meetings multiplied in the following weeks, each one revealing new layers of this woman who seemed to have lived her entire life between the lines of existence. Eric discovered that Hannah had a special talent for restoring not just books, but also moments. She transformed each shared instant into something precious, unique. On a Sunday afternoon, he surprised her at the library. The place was closed to the public, but Hannah always went on Sundays to work on special projects. He found her bent over an ancient volume of poetry, her skilled fingers delicately sewing the worn spine. "How did you get in here?" she asked, startled by his sudden presence. Eric smiled, showing a special authorization he had obtained from the library director. "I brought something for you," he said, placing a carved wooden box on the table. Hannah opened the box with the same care she devoted to the most fragile books. Inside, she found a set of restoration brushes imported from Italy, instruments she had always dreamed of having, but could never afford. Her eyes filled with contained tears. "Eric, it's too much," she murmured, touching the brushes, as if they were made of crystal. "Nothing is too much for you," he replied, realizing that this was the first time he had seen her truly moved. They sat together in one of the most secluded corners of the library, among shelves that housed centuries-old stories. Hannah began to talk about her childhood, about how books had become her refuge when her mother fell ill. "I was 15, she recounted, her voice almost a whisper. "Suddenly I had to be an adult. There was no time for anything else." Eric listened, feeling his heart tighten with each revelation. Hannah had never had a boyfriend, never traveled beyond the city limits, never experienced the freedom that youth should provide. Her life had been an eternal act of self-sacrifice. "Have you ever thought about what it would be like to live differently?" he asked, choosing his words carefully. Hannah was silent for a long moment, her fingers playing with the pages of a nearby book. "Sometimes, when I'm restoring a very old book, I imagine the stories it could tell beyond those that are written," she began, her voice taking on a dreamy tone that Eric had never heard before. "I think about the people who read it, the places it's been, the lives it touched, and I wonder if I too could have other stories besides this one I live." That confession, so sincere and vulnerable, made Eric make another important decision. He took a small blue velvet box from his pocket. Hannah held her breath, her eyes fixed on the object that represented much more than a simple request. "I know it may seem rushed," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate ring with a single pearl. "But when we find something true, why?" "Wait." Hannah looked at the ring, then at Eric, and again at the ring. Her hands trembled slightly. I never don't know how," she stammered, the words tangling with emotion. "You don't need to know," Eric replied softly. "We can discover together. Each blank page of your life can be filled with new stories, our stories." The silence that followed was different from all the others they had shared. It was a silence full of possibilities, of unspoken promises, of futures not yet written. Hannah extended her hand, allowing Eric to slide the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered, and in that single word was contained all the courage she had kept for years. It was more than an acceptance of marriage. It was an acceptance of herself, a permission to finally begin to live. The wedding was intimate as Hannah desired. Just a few close people gathered in an old chapel on the outskirts of New York. The centuries-old walls witnessed the union of two souls who, although at different moments in life, found in each other what they didn't know they were looking for. Hannah's mother couldn't attend. Her condition didn't allow for travel. But through a video call, she watched her daughter take the first step toward a life of her own. Her tears, mixed with a weak smile, carried a complex mixture of joy and guilt. Eric had planned every detail of the honeymoon with meticulous care. He chose a private island in the Maldives, a paradise where Hannah could blossom away from the world's gaze. The bungalow over the crystal-clear waters seemed to have come from a dream she had never dared to have. On the first night, as the sun set painting the sky in impossible shades, Hannah stood on the veranda, her hands gripping the railing tightly enough to turn her knuckles white. Eric approached from behind, enveloping her in a gentle embrace. "Is everything all right?" he whispered in her ear. Hannah trembled slightly, not from desire but from an ancestral fear that even she didn't fully understand. "It's all so big," she replied, her eyes fixed on the infinite horizon. "The sea, the sky, this new life. Sometimes I feel like I'll get lost in it." Eric gently turned her in his arms, meeting her teary eyes. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, wiping away an escaping tear. "We can go at your pace. There's no rush." But there was something in Hannah's gaze that went beyond a bride's nervousness on her first night. It was a weight that Eric still couldn't decipher, a secret that she carried like an invisible anchor. That night, while Hannah took a long bath, Eric opened his laptop to answer some work emails. It was then that a notification popped up on the screen, a report he had requested weeks earlier. His finger hovered over the mouse, hesitant. That file contained information about Hannah's past, discovered through a discreet investigation he had ordered before the wedding. The justification he had given himself was noble. He wanted to better understand the woman he loved in order to help her. But now, hearing the sound of the shower and imagining Hannah vulnerable on the other side of the door, he felt the weight of his own distrust. The report revealed details she had never mentioned. Her mother's illness wasn't just physical. There was a history of deep depression that had dragged on for decades. Her father hadn't simply left, as Hannah had said once. He had abandoned the family when she was only 5, leaving them in a precarious financial situation. Hannah emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a fluffy bathrobe, her damp hair framing her face flushed from the steam. Eric quickly closed the laptop, suddenly feeling guilty. She sat on the edge of the bed, her restless hands smoothing the fabric of the robe. "Eric," her voice was just a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." He sat beside her, his heart accelerating with the possibility of finally knowing what troubled her so much. "When I was 16, she began, her words coming out as if each one cost an immense effort. "There was a moment when I thought I couldn't take it anymore. The responsibility, the isolation, everything was too heavy." She paused, taking a deep breath. "That's when I started writing. They weren't just stories, they were silent screams, calls for help that I never showed anyone." Eric held her hand, feeling it tremble. "Where are these writings?" he asked softly. Hannah closed her eyes as if the memory was too painful to face with open eyes. "I kept everything in an old box, hidden in the back of my closet. Pages and pages of a life I could never live, desires I could never fulfill." She opened her eyes, meeting his. "I'm afraid, Eric. Afraid that when you read those words, you'll see how broken I am." Eric pulled her closer, feeling her small body tremble against his. He wanted to say that he already knew part of her story, that nothing he had discovered diminished what he felt for her. But the words stuck in his throat, tied by the weight of his own secret. The days in the Maldives passed at their own pace, dictated by the movement of the tides and Hannah's slow awakening to a new version of herself. Eric watched fascinated as she began to transform, even if she didn't yet realize it. Every morning, while he swam in the crystal-clear sea, Hannah sat on the bungalow's veranda with a new notebook, a gift from Eric. At first, she just observed the horizon, her fingers caressing the blank pages as if trying to gather courage to fill them. It was on the 4th morning that something changed. Eric was returning from his swim when he saw her completely absorbed in writing, her hair swaying with the sea breeze, a soft smile playing on her lips. He approached silently, not wanting to break that magical moment. "May I read it?" he asked, gently. Hannah started, closing the notebook in a reflexive movement. "Not yet," she replied, blushing. It's too personal." Her eyes met his, full of a vulnerability that begged for understanding. Eric sat beside her, still wet from the sea. "You know what I admire most about you?" he asked, changing the subject to ease her tension. Hannah shook her head, curious. "Your ability to hold entire worlds within you. It's as if you were a living library, full of stories waiting to be told." His words provoked something in Hannah. She looked at the sea, her hand still holding the notebook tightly. "Sometimes I wonder if I haven't wasted too much time being just the guardian of other people's stories," she confessed. "Of the books I restore of my mother's life." "It's never too late to start your own story," Eric replied, taking her hand and delicately kissing her fingers. Hannah trembled at the touch but didn't pull away. It was subtle progress but significant. That afternoon, they decided to take a boat trip to watch the sunset. The boat captain, an islander with a gentle smile, explained about the marine currents and the life of local fishermen. Hannah listened attentively, her eyes shining with a curiosity that Eric had never seen before. When the sun began to dip into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, something unexpected happened. A small wave rocked the boat, and Hannah, instead of shrinking in fear as she usually did, laughed. It was a genuine, spontaneous laugh that caught everyone by surprise, especially herself. "I never noticed how gentle the sea can be," she commented, her fingers playing in the water. Eric observed her, amazed at the small revolution happening before his eyes. Back at the bungalow, while they dined under the stars, Hannah surprised again. "I think I want to learn to swim," she said suddenly between bites of grilled fish. Eric almost choked on his wine. "Are you sure?" he asked, remembering how she used to tremble just looking at the ocean. Hannah nodded, her eyes fixed on the night horizon where the sky met the sea. "Every life has its tides, doesn't it?" she philosophized, her voice carrying a newly discovered wisdom. "Moments of flow and ebb, perhaps it's time to let the tide take me a little, instead of fighting against it." Eric felt his eyes water at those words. He thought of the hidden report on his laptop, of the weight of secrets they both carried. He wondered if it wasn't time to also let himself be carried by the tide of truth. "Hannah," he began, his voice more serious than intended. But before he could continue, she stood up abruptly, her eyes fixed on something in the water. A group of dolphins had approached the bungalow, their silvery backs gleaming under the moonlight. "It's a sign," she whispered, enchanted. "Of what?" Eric asked, standing up to embrace her from behind. Hannah leaned back against him, allowing herself for the first time to completely relax in his arms. "That sometimes we need to dive into the unknown to discover who we really are," she replied, her voice carrying a certainty that he had never heard before. Hannah's first swimming lesson happened on a calm morning when the sea was especially serene. Eric had hired Lisa, a local instructor with vast experience in teaching adults who feared water. The young Maldivian woman had a welcoming smile and eyes that conveyed security. "Breathe with me," Lisa guided, while Hannah clung to the edge of the resort's pool. "Water is our friend, it sustains us." Eric observed from a distance, resisting the urge to intervene each time he saw fear in his wife's eyes. Gradually, Hannah let go of the edge. First, she just floated on her back, eyes closed, lips trembling. Slightly, Lisa murmured words of encouragement, guiding her with gentle touches. "Feel how your body is lighter here," she said. "The water embraces you." During that first session, something extraordinary happened. Hannah opened her eyes while, floating and for the first time in her life, saw the sky from a different perspective. The clouds danced above her, and a genuine smile illuminated her face. "It's like being in another world," she whispered, amazed. Eric felt his heart tighten at that discovery, so simple yet so profound. After the lesson, as they walked, on the beach, Hannah was different. Her steps were firmer, her shoulders less tense. She stopped to collect a shell from the sand, examining it with the same care she devoted to old books. "Did you know that shells are like diaries of the sea?" she commented, her fingers tracing the delicate spirals. "Each line tells a story, each mark is a memory." Eric observed her, fascinated by this new Hannah emerging, word by word, gesture by gesture. Back at the bungalow, she asked to use Eric's laptop to research marine shells. His heart raced. The report was still there, hidden in a seemingly unimportant folder. "Of course," he replied, trying to keep his voice casual. "I'll take a shower meanwhile." But instead of relaxing under the hot water, Eric found himself consumed by guilt. The investigation he had conducted, although motivated by concern, now seemed an unforgivable violation. When he came out of the shower, he found Hannah sitting on the veranda, the laptop closed beside her. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly. "Eric," her voice was a thread, "we need to talk." He felt his blood freeze in his veins. He knew, even before she continued, that she had discovered everything. I found a folder," she continued, each word weighing like lead, "with reports about me, about my family, about things I never—" Her voice failed and tears began to stream down her face. Eric sat beside her, trying to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Why?" she asked, her voice choked. "Why investigate my life as if I were—" as if I were an investment to be evaluated. It's not like that, he tried to explain, his heart painfully beating against his chest. I just wanted to understand you better, wanted to know how I could help you. Help me? Hannah stood up abruptly. By rummaging through my past without my permission, discovering secrets that even I didn't know existed? Her eyes met his, full of a pain that pierced him like a blade. You knew about my father before. I even told you. You knew about my mother's problems. You knew... She choked on the words. You knew about that night at the hospital when I was 17, the night I never told anyone about. Eric felt the weight of his actions crashing down on his shoulders. That specific night, an attempt to give up that Hannah had overcome alone, was something he had discovered in the report and that had haunted him since then. I thought I was protecting you, he whispered, realizing how empty his words sounded. Hannah walked to the edge of the veranda, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. You know what's most ironic? She said, her voice now strangely calm. I was finally learning to trust, to open up, to believe that I could be more than my past. She turned to face him, and Eric saw something new in her eyes, not just pain, but also a strength he had never noticed before. You didn't need to investigate my life, she continued. I would have told you everything, in my own time, in my own way, because for the first time I was beginning to believe that I deserved to be heard. The silence that followed the discovery was deafening. Hannah spent the night in the main village of the island, in a room that Lisa, the swimming instructor, kindly offered. Eric remained in the bungalow, torturing himself with each minute that passed, with each wave that broke against the pillars of the construction. The tower. Next morning, he found Hannah's notebook on the veranda table. It was open like a silent invitation. His hands trembled as he touched the pages, recognizing that this was a crucial moment. For the first time, she was allowing someone to enter her inner world. The words written there left him breathless. They weren't just accounts or outpourings. They were pure, raw, honest poetry. Hannah wrote about the sea, about how it scared and fascinated her at the same time, about how each wave seemed to carry a secret, a possibility of a new beginning. The sea doesn't ask about our past, one passage said. It just invites us to dive into the present, to trust that its waters will sustain us, even when we can't see the bottom. Eric closed the notebook, feeling hot tears streaming down his face. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. In trying to protect Hannah, he had taken something precious from her, the chance to reveal herself on her own terms. He decided to take the first step toward reconciliation. He took his own laptop and began to write, letting his own truths flow like the waves that so fascinated his wife. He wrote about his fear of being abandoned, a legacy from a previous marriage that ended in betrayal, about how he had built a financial empire to fill the void he carried within, about how upon meeting Hannah, for the first time he felt that all his material success meant nothing compared to the richness of a true soul. When he finished, he saved the file with the name My Truths and went to the village to look for Hannah. He found her sitting on the beach watching the sunrise. He approached slowly, respecting her space. I read your notebook, he said softly. Hannah didn't turn, but her body tensed. And I brought something for you to read too, he continued, extending the laptop. Hannah hesitated for a moment before taking the computer. As she read, Eric observed her expressions change. Surprise, understanding, pain, and finally, something. That seemed like compassion. You have your ghosts too, she said at last, her voice as soft as the morning breeze. I do, admitted Eric, sitting beside her on the sand, and instead of trusting you to understand them, I let them dictate my actions. I wanted so much to protect you that I ended up hurting you. Hannah was silent for a long moment, her fingers playing with the sand. You know what I learned yesterday, floating in the pool? She finally asked. I learned that sometimes we need to let go of the edges that hold us, to discover that we can float on our own. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the sunrise. I don't need you to protect me, Eric. I need you to trust me, to trust in my strength, even when I doubt it myself. "And you?" he asked, his heart suspended between hope and fear. "Can you still trust me?" Hannah extended her hand, lightly touching his face. "Trust is like swimming," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "We need to practice every day. Sometimes we sink, but we can always return to the surface." "Teach me?" Eric asked, his voice choked. "To trust like that, to be truthful without fear?" Hannah took his hand and placed it over her heart. "We'll learn together," she replied. "Like two imperfect people, trying to find the right rhythm, between giving and receiving, between protecting and liberating." The sun was already high in the sky when they decided to return to the bungalow. On the way, Hannah stopped to collect another shell. "Each mark here," she said, showing the imperfections on the pearly surface, "is part of what makes it unique, just like our scars." Eric understood the message. Sometimes it's precisely our imperfections that make us more truthful, more worthy of love. And as they walked hand in hand along the beach, he realized they were writing a new chapter, not just in their notebooks and laptops, but in their lives. The following days brought a new dynamic to Hannah and Eric's relationship. The truth, although painful, had opened space for a deeper intimacy. The swimming lessons continued, but now they carried a different meaning. Each dive was an exercise in mutual trust. Lisa, the instructor, noticed the change in Hannah. "You're lighter in the water," she commented during a particularly successful session, "as if you've left something heavy on the shore." That morning, Hannah managed to swim for the first time without support. It was just a few meters, but each stroke carried the weight of a personal victory. Eric watched from the edge of the pool, his heart overflowing with pride and admiration. "Come," Hannah called him, surprising everyone. She was in the middle of the pool, her legs moving gently to keep her afloat. "Swim with me." Eric didn't hesitate. He entered the water and swam to her, maintaining a respectful distance. Hannah smiled and extended her hand, touching his wet face. "Sometimes," she said, "we need to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to discover our true strength." Back at the bungalow, Hannah surprised Eric again. She opened her suitcase and took out an old box, the kind that holds important memories. "I want you to see this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "These are my old writings, the ones I mentioned on our first night here." Eric sat beside her, respecting the solemn moment. Hannah opened the box carefully, revealing dozens of notebooks worn by time. "I started writing when I was 16, she explained, taking one of the oldest notebooks. "It was my only form of escape." The yellowed pages revealed a soul in torment, poems about loneliness, tales about imaginary worlds where girls could fly away from their responsibilities, reflections on the weight of growing up too fast. Eric read each word with reverence, finally understanding the depth of the being who had chosen to share her life with him. "There's a specific text I want you to read," Hannah said, flipping through one of the notebooks until she found the desired page. It was a letter dated 5 years ago, addressed to a love she didn't yet know. "Dear Unknown," the letter began. "Today Mom had a good day. She smiled 3 times and managed to eat on her own. While helping her bathe, she told me something I'll never forget. She said her biggest regret was turning me into her caretaker so early, stealing my youth without realizing it. She cried as she said this, and for the first time I wasn't the one who consoled her. I let her tears fall, let her regret find voice, and as I watched her, I realized I have a regret too, never having allowed someone to take care of me." Eric felt his own tears falling. Hannah continued reading. "So love I haven't yet met, if one day we find each other, I ask just one thing. Don't try to fix my past. Don't try to erase my scars. They are maps that brought me here, to this moment. When I finally understand that I deserve to be loved, not despite my wounds, but with them." The silence that followed was dense with meaning. Eric took Hannah's hands in his, noticing how they had become stronger since she began to swim. "You know what impresses me most about you?" he asked softly. Hannah shook her head. "How you manage to transform pain into poetry. How each experience, even the most difficult ones, becomes material to create beauty." Hannah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I learned that from the books I restore," she explained. "Even the most damaged ones, the ones that seem irretrievable, hold stories that deserve to be preserved. It just takes patience, care, and the understanding that some marks are part of the story." That night, as they dined under the stars, Hannah shared a decision. "I want to turn my writings into a book," she said, her voice firm. "Not to expose my pain, but to show other people that it's possible to find light even in the darkest moments." Eric looked at her with renewed admiration. "And how can I help?" he asked, genuinely interested in being part of this new chapter of her life. "By being my reader," she replied with a smile. "My first and most important reader, not as someone who wants to protect me, but as someone who trusts in my ability to fly alone." The transformation of Hannah happened before everyone's eyes. Her swimming lessons now included dives in the shallower parts of the sea, where small, colorful fish danced around her. Lisa, the instructor, commented on how rare it was to see someone evolve so quickly. "It's as if you found your own current," Lisa said during one of the sessions. Hannah reflected on these words as she floated on her back, observing the clouds that traveled across the Maldivian sky. One morning, while they were having breakfast on the bungalow's veranda, a resort employee brought a surprise. An elderly gentleman, wearing light clothes and carrying a worn leather folder, asked to speak with them. It was Richard Thompson, a retired editor who now lived on the islands. "Excuse the intrusion," he said after the introductions. "But I've been observing you in the last few days, especially you, ma'am," he addressed Hannah with a gentle smile. "There's something in the way you look at the sea, as if you were reading a story that no one else can see." Hannah blushed slightly, while Eric observed her with curiosity. Richard continued, "Lisa told me that you write, that you have notebooks full of untold stories. I'd like to read them if you'll allow me." The request caught Hannah by surprise. Her fingers instinctively sought Eric's, who squeezed them gently in support. "They're not happy stories," she warned, her voice low. Richard smiled with understanding. "The best stories are rarely just happy," he replied. "They're true, and truth has many faces, some sweet, others bitter, but all important." After a moment of hesitation, Hannah nodded. She retrieved her notebooks and handed them to Richard, who received them with the same care that she devoted to the old books she restored. "I'll return tomorrow," he promised, standing up. "Same time, if that's all right." That night was one of anxiety for Hannah. She walked on the beach until late, Eric always a few steps behind, respecting her space but remaining present. The stars seemed especially bright, as if they too were waiting to hear the verdict on her most intimate words. The next morning, Richard returned. His eyes shone in a different way, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the notebooks. "My dear," he began, his voice choked with emotion, "for years I haven't read something so honest, so deeply human. Your story about caring for your mother, about finding refuge in books, about learning to swim in life even before touching the sea. It's extraordinary." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. For the first time, she didn't feel ashamed of her vulnerability. "I have a proposal," continued Richard. "I retired from the publishing house in London, but I still maintain contacts. I'd like to help you transform these writings into a book, not just a memoir, but a guide for other people who are also learning to swim in their own deep waters." Eric observed the scene in silence, his heart overflowing. With pride, Hannah had found her voice, and now the world would have the chance to hear it. "But," Hannah hesitated, "what about my mother? How would she react to seeing our story exposed like this?" Richard took her hands in his, a paternal gesture that reminded her of the father she never truly knew. "Sometimes sharing our pain is the greatest proof of love we can give. Your story can help other daughters, other mothers, find their way back to each other." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to confirm Richard's words, Hannah's phone rang. It was her mother calling via video chat. With trembling hands, Hannah answered. The face that appeared on the screen was different, more serene, more present. "Daughter," said her mother, a soft smile on her lips. "I needed to see you. Today I woke up with a certainty. You are exactly where you should be, and I I am finally learning to be okay alone." Her mother's words were like the last piece of a puzzle falling into place. Hannah looked at Eric, at Richard, at the sea. That was now her friend, and made her decision. The decision to publish the book brought with it a wave of changes. Hannah dedicated her mornings to writing, sitting on the bungalow's veranda with her new notebook, a gift from Eric. Richard appeared every day to guide her, bringing his decades of experience in the publishing market and, more importantly, his sensitive eye for stories that needed to be told. "It's not just about exposing your life," Richard explained as they reviewed the first chapters. "It's about transforming your experience into a bridge for other people." Hannah absorbed every piece of advice, every suggestion, with the same dedication she previously reserved only for her old books. But there was a particular chapter that she avoided writing, the one about the night at the hospital when she was 17. "I can't run from this forever, can I?" she asked Eric one night as they walked on the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed to pour onto the ocean. "You don't have to tell everything," he replied softly. "Some stories can remain just ours." Hannah stopped walking, her feet sinking slightly into the warm sand. "The problem is that this story isn't just mine. It's my mother's too, and maybe other mothers and daughters need to hear it." That night, Hannah sat down to write. The words flowed like a long-dammed river, carrying with them years of silence and contained pain. She wrote about the exhaustion of being so young and carrying such a great weight. About how, on that specific night, her mother had a particularly severe depression crisis. "I was 17 and felt like I was 50, Hannah wrote. "That night, after finally managing to calm my mother, I sat on the floor of the hospital bathroom and cried until I had no more tears. That's when a nurse, I never knew her name, sat beside me and simply held my hand. She didn't say everything would be all right, didn't try to console me with empty words. She just stayed there, witnessing my pain, allowing me to be fragile for the first time in years." When she finished writing, it was already dawn. Eric, who had remained awake, found her on the veranda, looking at the night sea. "I finished," she said simply, her voice hoarse from crying so much. Eric embraced her. From behind and together, they observed the stars reflected in the calm water. "You know what impresses me most about you," he whispered in her ear. "How you manage to transform even your darkest nights into stars to guide others." The next morning, when Richard read the new chapter, his eyes were watery. "This," he said, pointing to the text, "is the heart of your book. It's not just about surviving, it's about how we can find light even in the darkest moments." But the real surprise came through a video call with her mother. Hannah had sent the chapter for her to read, fearing her reaction. The response came in the form of an unexpected confession. "Daughter," her mother began, her voice trembling but firm, "that nurse was your Aunt Claire." Hannah felt the world spin. "Aunt Claire? But she never said anything." "She came to me the next day," her mother continued. "She told me about finding you in the bathroom. It was she who made me realize that I needed to seek professional help, that I couldn't continue burdening you like that. She wanted to tell you, but I asked her not to. I was ashamed, felt guilty. And now, reading your words, I realized that this silence was one more weight I placed on you." The revelations kept coming. Her mother told about how Claire, in the following years, had become her unofficial therapist, helping her deal with depression in a healthier way. How it had been she who suggested that Hannah work at the library, knowing that books would be a safe refuge. "Why did you never tell me?" Hannah asked, tears freely streaming down her face. "Because some truths need the right time to be revealed," her mother replied softly. "Like this book you're writing now, like this love you finally allowed into your life." Hannah looked at Eric, who held her hand as she talked with her mother, and then at Richard, who observed the scene with an understanding smile. She realized that each person there represented a different part of her journey, past, present, and future intertwining in a story that was now ready to be told. The revelation about Aunt Claire opened a door that Hannah didn't know existed. In the days that followed, she delved into her memories with a different perspective. rewriting her own story not just with the words she knew, but with the truths she now discovered. One morning, while swimming with Lisa, now more a friend than an instructor, Hannah had an epiphany. "It's funny," she said, floating calmly in the crystal-clear waters, "how we spend so much time trying to keep our heads above water, when sometimes we need precisely to dive to find what we're looking for." Lisa smiled, understanding the metaphor. "You're not the same person who arrived here trembling at the sight of the sea," she observed. It was true. Hannah had changed not just in her relationship with water, but in her way of existing in the world. Her movements were more assured, her voice firmer, her smile more frequent. Eric noticed each small transformation with a mixture of pride and admiration. It was during a special dinner organized by Richard that another surprise emerged. The editor had invited some friends from the literary world who were visiting the islands, including Sarah Chen, a renowned children's book editor. "Hannah," Sarah said after hearing about her work at the library, "have you ever thought about writing for children? There's something in the way you describe your experiences, a special sensitivity for transforming complexity into something accessible." The suggestion caught Hannah by surprise. "I never considered that," she admitted, but her hands were already instinctively seeking the notebook she always carried with her. "Think about it," Sarah continued. "Sometimes the most important stories are those that help children understand that they're not alone in their experiences." That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She sat on the bungalow's veranda and began to write a different story. About a girl who discovered she could breathe underwater but was afraid to dive. Eric found her there the next morning, asleep over the notebook full of drawings and words. "Look," she said when she woke up, showing him the pages. "It's a story about courage, about learning to trust oneself, but told in a way that a child can understand." Eric read the story attentively, his eyes filling with tears as he recognized elements of Hannah's own journey, transformed into a magical and accessible narrative. "It's perfect," he said simply. The news that Hannah was writing a children's book parallel to her memoir reached her mother, who reacted with unexpected joy. "Remember those drawings you used to make when you were little?" she asked during a video call. "Those with mermaids and sea creatures? I kept them all." "You kept them?" Hannah asked, surprised. She always thought her mother barely noticed her childhood creations during the most difficult periods of her depression. "Of course I kept them. They were the only moments when I saw you truly happy. Even in my darkest days, I kept every drawing, every story you invented. It was my way of clinging to the hope that one day you would be free to create your own worlds." Richard, upon learning of the saved drawings, suggested something bold. "Why not illustrate your own children's book, make this story completely yours?" The idea was both frightening and exciting. Hannah spent days practicing, recovering a long-dormant skill. Eric surprised her with a set of professional watercolors, and gradually, the pages of her notebook gained color and life. "It's as if each part of me is finally finding its place," Hannah commented one night while showing Eric her progress. "The writer, the artist, the swimmer, all are parts of the same story." "And what story is that?" he asked softly. Hannah looked at the night sea, then at her drawings, and finally at the man who had helped awaken so many possibilities within her. "It's a story about learning to float," she replied with a smile, "about discovering that our fragilities can be our greatest strength, about understanding that sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves." Eric embraced her, feeling how different she was, more present, more complete. "And about love?" he asked, playing with a strand of her hair. "Yes," she replied, leaning against him. "About all types of love. The love that heals, the love that liberates, and mainly, the love that allows us to be exactly who we are." The days in the Maldives were coming to an end, but something in Hannah had changed forever. Her drawings for the children's book took shape with surprising beauty, blending elements of her memories with the magic she now found in the sea. Sarah Chen, the children's book editor, had become a constant presence in her creative afternoons. "Something special is happening here," she commented, watching Hannah put the finishing touches on a particularly touching illustration. A small girl sitting by the sea, surrounded by floating books. It's based on a real memory, Hannah explained, dipping the brush in a soft shade of blue. When I was a child, on days when Mum was very ill, I would take my books to the beach near our home. I never entered the water, but I spent hours imagining the stories, diving into the sea and returning with secrets from the bottom of the ocean. Eric, who was listening to the conversation while working on his laptop, raised his eyes with interest. It was the first time Hannah had mentioned these solitary escapes from her childhood. "And what did the books bring back from the bottom of the sea?" Sarah asked gently, realizing they had touched on something important. Hannah stopped painting, her eyes lost in a distant memory. "They brought other mothers," she replied softly. "Mothers who smiled, who played, who didn't need medication to get out of bed. But they also brought understanding. Each story I read helped me understand that I wasn't alone, that other people also faced similar challenges." Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Eric. "That's exactly why your book is so important," she said. "You're creating for other children the same kind of comfort you sought in books." It was at this moment that a resort employee knocked on the bungalow door, bringing a bulky package. It was from Hannah's mother, the childhood drawings she had promised to send. With trembling hands, Hannah opened the package. Inside, besides the drawings, there was an old diary that she had never seen before. "It's Grandma's diary," her mother explained through a text message that accompanied the package. "I found it among her things when I was looking for your drawings. I think you need to read it." The diary revealed a family secret that no one had ever mentioned. Her grandmother, who passed away when Hannah was still a baby, had also struggled with depression. But unlike her mother, she had found healing through art. "Each brushstroke is a way to breathe," her grandmother had written in one of the last entries in the diary. "Each color is a way of saying, I'm still here, I'm still fighting, I'm still creating beauty even in the darkest days." Hannah spent the night reading the diary, discovering an ancestral connection she never knew existed. Her grandmother had been a children's book illustrator, publishing under a pseudonym during the 60s. Her illustrations, delicate and full of sea creatures, were surprisingly similar to the drawings that Hannah herself was creating now. "It's as if it were a gift passed through generations," commented Eric, flipping through one of the old books that Hannah had found online, illustrated by her grandmother. "But each of you expressed it in your own way." The next morning, Hannah woke up before the sun rose. She sat at her work desk and began to paint with renewed energy. Now, each stroke carried not just her story, but the story of 3 generations, of women who had found in art a form of healing. "I'll call the book Dives," she announced during breakfast. "It will be a story about a girl who discovers that her family has a special gift, the ability to breathe stories underwater. But to access this gift, she must first face her fears and dive." Sarah, who had joined them for breakfast, smiled with approval. "It's a powerful metaphor," she said, "about heritage, courage, and the transformative power of art. And about healing," added Hannah, looking at her grandmother's drawings spread on the table. "About how sometimes we need to go back in time, understand our roots, to be able to grow in our own direction." Eric observed his wife with admiration. Hannah radiated a new confidence, as if each discovery about her past made her stronger, more complete. She was no longer just the shy woman he had met at the library. She was an artist, discovering her voice, a storyteller, finding her narrative. The discovery of her grandmother's diary triggered a series of revelations that no one could have predicted. During one of her researches about the books illustrated by her, Hannah found something surprising, an old interview in a local newspaper where her grandmother talked about an unfinished project. It was supposed to be a series of books, Hannah read aloud to Eric and Sarah, who listened attentively. About a girl who could see colors in the water. Each book would represent a different emotion, a different journey of self-discovery. But she never completed the series. "Why not?" asked Sarah, already imagining the editorial possibilities. Hannah continued reading, her voice trembling slightly. "Postpartum depression after the birth of my daughter, Hannah's mother, prevented me from continuing. The colors I saw in the water began to disappear, and with them my ability to create. This will always be my greatest regret, not having been strong enough to continue telling these stories." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Eric approached Hannah, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps," he suggested softly, "you can continue her story." The idea caught Hannah by surprise. She looked at her own drawings, at her grandmother's illustrations, and suddenly everything made sense. It wouldn't just be continuing, she said, a new light shining in her eyes. It would be completing a circle. That afternoon, Hannah had a long video conversation with her mother. Together, they explored old boxes of memories, discovering more hidden treasures, unfinished sketches by her grandmother, notes about the stories she planned to tell, even a small notebook with poems about the sea. "She used to take me to the a beach when I was very young," her mother recalled, her words laden with long-kept emotion. "Before the depression became too severe, she would say that the water had all the colors of the world, that you just needed to know how to look with an open heart." "How do you feel?" Hannah asked delicately, "knowing that I'm following in her footsteps?" Her mother was silent for a moment, silent tears streaming down her face. "I feel that through you, daughter, something is being healed. Not just in our family, but perhaps in other families who will read your stories." The conversation inspired Hannah to make a significant change to her project. "It won't be just one book," she explained to Sarah the next morning. "It will be a trilogy. The first story will be about the girl discovering her gift. The second will be about her understanding that this gift comes from her grandmother. And the third will be about her helping her own mother rediscover the colors in the water," completed Sarah, understanding the vision. "Exactly," Hannah smiled, already beginning to sketch new illustrations. "Each book will have a different style of illustration. The first will have my colors, my style. The second will incorporate elements from my grandmother's drawings. And the third will be a fusion, showing how different generations can heal together." Eric observed his wife working, amazed at her transformation. The woman who once could barely look at the sea now created entire worlds within it. The person who was afraid of her own story now transformed it into art. "You know what's most incredible?" Hannah commented, while painting a particularly touching scene. 3 women of different ages swimming together in a sea full of colors. "I'm not just telling a story. I'm rebuilding a bridge between generations, healing wounds I didn't even know existed." Sarah, who had become not just an editor but a close friend, smiled with approval. "And the most beautiful thing is that you're doing this without denying the pain, without trying to erase the difficult parts of the story. You're showing that it's possible to create beauty, even from the darkest moments." Hannah stopped painting for a moment, looking at the sea through the bungalow window. "It's funny," she said thoughtfully, "how sometimes we need to go so far to find something that was always within us. This place, this sea helped me discover not just who I am, but where I come from, and more importantly, where I can go." Work on the trilogy advanced rapidly, with Hannah dedicating long hours to illustrations and writing. Each page seemed to flow naturally, as if the stories were just waiting for the right moment to be told. But it was during a particularly intense painting session that something unexpected happened. Sarah had brought more materials about her grandmother's career, including some old letters found in the archives of the publishing house where she had worked. Among them, Hannah discovered a correspondence that would change her understanding of everything. "Dear Amelia," began the letter, dated a few months before her grandmother's disappearance, "I know you don't want anyone to know about your condition, but as your editor and friend, I must insist that you seek help. Your stories about the girl who sees colors in the water are too important to remain unfinished. There are so many children waiting for them." Hannah felt her hands tremble as she continued reading. The letter revealed that her grandmother hadn't simply given up writing, she was fighting against something much more serious than postpartum depression. "Eric," she called, her voice almost a whisper, "I need to show you something." Together they read the rest of the correspondence. The condition mentioned was a serious diagnosis that her grandmother had hidden from everyone. She knew her time was limited and was desperate to finish her series of books. That's why she wrote so much about seeing colors in the water, Hannah realized, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just a metaphor about depression, it was her way of leaving something beautiful before departing. Eric embraced his wife, feeling how this discovery affected her deeply. "This doesn't change how important your work is," he said softly. "In fact, it makes everything even more significant." Hannah spent the night awake, rereading all the letters, connecting dots that before seemed scattered. Her grandmother had planned not just 3 but 7 books, each representing a different color of the rainbow and a different lesson about healing and acceptance. The next morning, during her swimming lesson with Lisa, Hannah had an epiphany. While floating in the crystal-clear waters, "I need to expand the project," she announced during breakfast, her eyes shining with determination. "It won't be just 3 books, it will be 7, exactly as she planned." Sarah, who had become a constant presence in her creative mornings, leaned in with interest. "Tell me more," she asked, already sensing the potential of the idea. "Each book will be dedicated to a color and a different type of healing," Hannah explained, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. "Red will be about courage, orange about creativity, yellow about joy, green about growth, blue about truth, indigo about intuition, and violet about transformation." Eric observed his wife with admiration. The shy woman he had met at the library had transformed into a confident artist, capable of continuing her grandmother's legacy in a completely unique and personal way. "But there's more," Hannah continued, taking her sketchbook. "Each book will have a complementary activity workbook with art therapy exercises that I developed during my own healing journey. Children will be able to use art and writing to explore their own emotions, just as I did." Sarah picked up one of the sketches, studying it attentively. "This is revolutionary," she said. "You're creating not just books, but healing tools." It was at this moment that Hannah's phone rang. It was her mother, calling at an unusual time. Her face on the video was marked by tears, but there was a smile on her lips. "Daughter," she said, her voice choked, "I found something you need to see. I was organizing the attic and, well, I found your grandmother's last manuscript, what she was writing before she left." Hannah felt her heart stop for a moment. "The manuscript of the 7th book?" she asked, barely able to contain her emotion. "Yes," her mother replied, "and it has a dedication. For you. For me. But I was just a baby when she..." "The dedication says, 'For my granddaughter Hannah, who is not yet born, but who I know will one day find the colors in the water that I so loved. Continue my story, little one. The colors are waiting for you.'" The silence that followed was laden with emotion. Hannah looked at her drawings spread across the table, at the sea beyond the veranda, and finally at Eric, who observed her with watery eyes. "She knew," Hannah whispered. "Somehow she knew that I would continue her story." The discovery of her grandmother's manuscript brought a new dimension to Hannah's project. Her mother carefully digitized each page and sent it by email, allowing Hannah to immerse herself in her grandmother's last words during the quiet nights in the Maldives. The manuscript was different from anything Hannah expected. It wasn't just a children's story, it was a love letter to the future, a guide to finding beauty even in the most difficult moments. The girl of colors, Hannah, read aloud to Eric one night, discovered that her greatest strength wasn't in seeing the colors in the water, but in helping others find their own colors. Because sometimes all we need is someone to show us that beauty still exists, even when our world seems colorless. Sarah, upon learning the content of the manuscript, had a revolutionary idea. "What if we transformed this into something bigger?" she suggested during one of their morning meetings. "Not just books, but a complete art therapy project for children." The suggestion ignited something in Hannah. In the following days, she worked tirelessly, developing a program that combined elements of the books with practical activities. Each color would have its own set of exercises, inspired both by her grandmother's stories and by her own healing journey. "Red will be for days when we need courage," she explained, showing the first sketches of the material. "Children will be able to create their own protection amulets, just as the protagonist does in the book. Blue will be for moments of sadness, with breathing exercises and hand painting. Yellow for celebrating small victories." Eric observed his wife with a mixture of pride and admiration. "You're creating much more than a literary legacy," he said. "You're building a bridge between generations of healing." It was during one of these planning sessions that Hannah received an unexpected call. A former art teacher from her school had seen online some of the sketches that Sarah had shared on a literary blog. "Hannah," the familiar voice brought memories of simpler times. "I need to tell you something. Your grandmother was my art teacher. During a summer long before you were born, she was the one who inspired me to become a teacher." The revelation hit Hannah like a gentle wave. One more connection, one more invisible thread linking past and present. "She always said that art wasn't just about creating beauty," continued the teacher, "but about creating safe spaces where people could be true to themselves." Those words echoed deeply in Hannah. That night, alone on the bungalow's veranda, she began to write an introduction for the complete project. Colors in Water isn't just a series of books. It's an invitation to dive into yourself, to discover that our stories, however difficult they may be, can be transformed into something beautiful. It's a reminder that healing doesn't always come from expected places. Sometimes it comes from the pages of a book, from the colors of a painting, or from the gentle waves of a sea we learn not to fear. Sarah, upon reading the text the next morning, had tears in her eyes. "This will change lives," she said simply. The project grew organically, attracting interest from professionals in different areas. A child psychologist offered to supervise the development of the art therapy exercises. A rehabilitation center for children showed interest in implementing the program as a pilot project. But it was an email from her mother that brought the most significant surprise. She had started painting. "Your stories, daughter," she wrote, "made me remember something I had forgotten. Before the depression, before everything, I too saw colors in the water. Your grandmother taught me to paint when I was little. Maybe it's time for me to recover that part of me too." Hannah showed the email to Eric, her heart overflowing with emotion. "It's as if we were all healing together," she said softly. "3 generations finding different colors in the same water." Eric embraced his wife, feeling how she had changed since they arrived in the Maldives. It wasn't just an external transformation. It was something deeper, more fundamental. "You didn't just continue your grandmother's story," he said. "You transformed it into something entirely new, something that will touch many more lives than she could have imagined." The last days in the Maldives brought a different energy. The bungalow, previously a quiet refuge, had transformed into a vibrant creative studio. The walls were covered with illustrations, sketches, and colorful notes. Hannah worked with a serene intensity, as if each brushstroke brought her closer to something greater than herself. One morning, while organizing her illustrations with Sarah, Hannah received an unexpected message. It was from a former colleague from the library, Amanda, who had seen some images of the project shared online. "Hannah," the message said, "you probably don't know this, but your grandmother saved my mother's life. In the 70s, when she was pregnant with me and facing severe depression, she found one of your grandmother's books in a small bookstore. The story about the girl who saw colors in the water helped her continue. She kept the book all these years and gave it to me when I started working with book restoration. That's why I always felt a special connection with you, even without knowing about this link." Hannah sat, stunned by the revelation. Eric, who was working on his laptop nearby, noticed her expression and approached concerned. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly. "It's amazing how stories connect," Hannah replied, showing him the message. "How small acts of creation can echo through time, touching lives we can't even imagine." Sarah, who had become not just an editor but a close friend, picked up one of Hannah's most recent sketches, an illustration of 3 women of different generations, their hands intertwined, forming a rainbow over the sea. "You know what makes your work so special?" asked Sarah. "It's not just the technique or the story itself. It's how you manage to capture this invisible web that connects people through art and shared pain." It was at this moment that Lisa, the swimming instructor, arrived for Hannah's last lesson. But instead of going to the pool or the shallow sea, Lisa had a different proposal. "Today," she said with a gentle smile, "we're going to the coral reef." "You're ready." Hannah felt a chill in her stomach. The reef was in a deeper part of the sea, where the waters were an intense blue that had always frightened her. But something inside her had changed. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. "I'm ready," she replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Eric and Sarah watched from the beach as Hannah swam alongside Lisa toward the reef. Her movements were confident, assured. When they reached the designated point, Hannah dove. The underwater world she found took her breath away. Multicolored fish danced among corals that seemed hand-painted. The sunlight created hypnotic patterns in the water, as if the sea itself was illustrating a story. When she emerged, her eyes shone with a new light. "I need to paint this," she said as soon as she returned to the beach, already reaching for her sketchbook with hands trembling with excitement. For hours, Hannah worked on a new illustration. It wasn't just what she had seen on the reef. It was a fusion between the real world and the inner world she had discovered during her journey. In the drawing, the girl who saw colors in the water was diving into an ocean where each coral had a special meaning. There was the coral of courage, made of shades of red and orange, the coral of memory in shades of deep blue, the coral of healing in delicate shades of green. "This will be the center of the last book," she explained to Sarah, who watched in wonder. The moment when the girl finally understands that the colors she sees in the water aren't just reflections of the outside world. They're reflections of her own capacity to transform pain into beauty. That night, during a video call with her mother, Hannah shared the diving experience and showed the new illustration. To her surprise, her mother began to cry. "Your grandmother," she said between tears, "used to take me diving when I was very young before she got sick. She said that underwater we could hear the heart of the world beating. I never really understood what she meant, until now, seeing your drawing." As her mother spoke, Hannah realized she was completing not just a creative cycle, but a healing cycle that crossed generations. Each brushstroke in her books was a way to reconnect the broken threads of her family history, to give voice to silences that had lasted for decades. "Mom," Hannah said softly, "how about you come visit me when I get back? We could paint together. I have so many stories to tell you, and even more to hear." On the eve of leaving the Maldives, Hannah organized a small exhibition at the resort's cultural center. Sarah had suggested the idea as a way to present the complete project before they returned to New York. The gallery walls were transformed into an ocean of colors and stories, each illustration carefully positioned to tell not just the story of the books, but the journey that had inspired them. Eric observed with pride as Hannah guided the first visitors through the exhibition. She was no longer the shy woman who needed him as an intermediary with the world. Her voice was firm, her eyes shone with a quiet confidence as she explained the meaning behind each illustration. "This series represents the 7 colors of the rainbow," she explained to an interested group. "But they're not just colors, they're states of soul, moments of transformation. Red isn't just about courage, but about recognizing our inner strength. Blue isn't just about sadness, but about the depth of our emotions." Among the visitors was a group of local children who participated in an art therapy program at the resort. Their wide eyes before the illustrations were the purest proof that Hannah had managed to create something truly special. One of the girls, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, pulled at the hem of Hannah's dress. "Do you also see colors in the water?" she asked innocently. Hannah knelt to be at the child's height. "You know what?" she replied with a gentle smile. "We can all see colors in the water. Sometimes we just need someone to show us how to look." It was at this moment that Richard, the retired editor who had discovered Hannah weeks ago, entered the gallery. In his hands, he carried something that made Hannah's heart stop for a moment. It was a first edition of one of her grandmother's books, which he had managed to find through his contacts. "I thought you'd like to see this," he said, carefully handing her the book. "It's one of the few copies that still exist." Hannah opened the book with trembling hands. The illustrations, although faded by time, still carried a vibrant energy. But it was on the last page that she found something extraordinary, a handwritten note from her grandmother. "To whoever finds this book, the colors are always there even in the grayest days. Sometimes we just need to dive a little deeper to find them. And when we find them, it's our responsibility to share them with the world. Because perhaps somewhere someone needs exactly the color that only we can see. Sarah, who had approached to see the book, noticed the tears in Hannah's eyes. "This isn't an end," she said softly. "It's just the beginning." That night, after the exhibition, Hannah, Eric, Sarah, and Richard sat on the beach for a final dinner, under the stars. The sea was calm, reflecting the starry sky like an infinite mirror. "When we return," Hannah began, her voice carrying a new determination, "I want to transform the library where I work into something more. Not just a place to restore old books, but a space where people can discover their own colors." Eric smiled, recognizing in that idea the same gentle strength that had made him fall in love with her. "How do you imagine that?" he asked. "An art therapy studio," Hannah explained, her eyes shining with the possibility. "A place where children and adults can use art to express what words can't always say. Where books aren't just stories to read, but doors to self-healing." Sarah immediately picked up her tablet, beginning to take notes. "We can integrate this with the book launch," she suggested. "Create a network of similar spaces in other libraries." "And not just libraries," added Richard. "Hospitals, schools, community centers. There are so many people needing to find their own colors." Hannah looked at the night sea, thinking about how her life had changed since she arrived there. It wasn't just about overcoming the fear of water or discovering her artistic talent. It was about finding her true voice, her purpose. "You know what's most incredible?" she said, intertwining her fingers with Eric's. "When I arrived here, I thought I needed to be saved. But what I discovered is that we all have the power to save ourselves and to help others find their own way to the surface." The return to New York brought with it a different energy. The library, which before seemed a refuge from the world, now presented itself as a portal of possibilities. Hannah, carrying her illustrations and the complete project of the 7 books, saw the space with new eyes. The library director, Mrs. Thompson, a lady with grey hair and a gentle smile, listened attentively as Hannah presented her proposal to transform one of the less-used rooms into an art therapy studio. "It wouldn't just be a place to paint," Hannah explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It would be a space where people could discover their own stories through art, just as I discovered mine." Mrs. Thompson removed her reading glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. "You know, Hannah," she began, "your grandmother used to do something similar here." Hannah froze. "What do you mean?" "Oh, that was a long time ago, of course, before you were born. She would come on Saturdays and give art classes to children. They weren't ordinary classes. She had a special way of making each child feel seen, understood. She always said that each person carries an ocean within themselves." The revelation hit Hannah like a gentle wave. One more connection, one more invisible thread linking past and present. Her grandmother hadn't just written about seeing colors. In the water, she had created real spaces where others could discover their own colors. Eric, who was accompanying Hannah in this first week of readaptation, noticed the emotion in her eyes. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "you're completing more than a story. Perhaps you're rekindling a light that should never have gone out." The project was enthusiastically approved, not just by Mrs. Thompson, but by the entire library board. The chosen room, a spacious area with large windows that overlooked a small garden, began its transformation. Hannah worked tirelessly on the decoration, creating an environment that reflected the essence of her books. The walls were painted in soft tones that reminded of the Maldivian Sea. Shelves were installed to house not just art books, but also materials for the workshops she planned to conduct. One afternoon, while organizing brushes and paints, Hannah received an unexpected visit. It was Amanda, her former colleague from the library, who had sent that revealing message in the Maldives. "I brought something for you," said Amanda, extending a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was her grandmother's book, the one that had saved Amanda's mother so many years ago. "We thought it belongs in this place now," explained Amanda, her voice soft. "Mom said other people need to have the chance to find hope in its pages, just as she found." Hannah leafed through the book with reverent care. The pages were marked by time and love, with small notes in the margins made by Amanda's mother. Each note was a testimony to the transformative power that a story can have. "I'll put it in a special place," promised Hannah, already visualizing a small shelf dedicated to her grandmother's memory. Sarah, who had traveled from London to follow the development of the project, arrived at that moment carrying more news. The publishers were in a frenzy with the proposal of the 7 books, especially after seeing the results of the exhibition in the Maldives. "But there's more," said Sarah, barely containing her excitement. "Several libraries around the country have expressed interest in replicating your art therapy project. They want to create a network of healing spaces through art." Hannah sat down, feeling the weight of these possibilities. "How will I handle all this?" she asked, more to herself than to others. It was Eric who answered, his voice carrying that quiet certainty that always calmed her. "The same way you learned to swim, one movement at a time, trusting that the water will sustain you." That night, alone in her new studio, Hannah began to plan the first workshop. As she drew the schedule of activities, she realized she was creating much more than an art therapy program. She was building a space where people could allow themselves to be vulnerable, where they could discover that their stories, however difficult, deserved to be told. And in each plan, in each detail, there was a little of the girl who used to take books to the seashore, a little of the woman who learned to swim in the Maldives, and much of the artist her grandmother always knew she would be. The inauguration of the art therapy studio was scheduled for a sunny Saturday in spring. Hannah had chosen the date specifically because it was her grandmother's birthday. The room, now transformed into a welcoming and vibrant space, was ready to receive its first visitors. The walls displayed not just the illustrations from the books in development, but also old photographs that Mrs. Thompson had found in the library archives. Images of her grandmother teaching art to children in the same space decades ago. The first surprise of the day came even before the official inauguration. Her mother, who had promised to participate only by video due to her social anxiety, appeared at the studio door carrying an old box. "I couldn't not come," she said, her eyes shining with a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Some stories need to be told in person." The box contained dozens of drawings, not just Hannah's childhood ones, but also her mother's first artistic works, guided by her grandmother. They were simple paintings, but full of life and color, showing a talent that had been silenced by depression. "I started painting again," confessed her mother, taking a small sketchbook from her bag. "At first it was difficult. My hands trembled so much, but each time I picked up the brush I felt as if your grandmother was with me, guiding me again." Hannah embraced her mother, feeling how different she was, stronger, more present. The familiar scent of her childhood now came mixed with paint and watercolor. The activities began with a small group, just 10 people, including some neighborhood children and adults who had signed up after reading about the project in the local newspaper. Hannah had carefully planned each moment, but reality exceeded all her expectations. One of the participants was a 70-year-old lady who had never painted in her life. "I always thought it was too late to start," she said, her wrinkled hands holding a brush with reverent care. "It's never too late to find your colors," replied Hannah, gently guiding her through her first painting exercise. Eric observed everything, from a corner of the room, amazed at his wife's transformation. Hannah moved among the participants with a natural grace, as if she had been born for this role. She was no longer the woman who needed to hide behind books. She was an artist, a curator of stories, a guardian of colors. Sarah, who had brought some editors interested in the project, couldn't contain her enthusiasm. "This is much bigger than the books," she whispered to Eric. "It's a movement of healing through art." The afternoon progressed and stories began to flow along with the colors. A 12-year-old girl revealed that she also saw different colors in the water when she was sad. An elderly man told how art had helped him overcome the loss of his wife. Hannah's mother, to everyone's surprise, offered to share her own journey of rediscovery through painting. It was during a break that Hannah found a folded note in her brush case. The handwriting was her mother's. "Dear daughter, Today, seeing you in this space, I finally understood something your grandmother always said. Art isn't just about creating beauty. It's about creating bridges between wounded hearts. You built that bridge, Hannah. Not just between the three of us, you, me, and your grandmother, but between all the people who will find healing through the colors you're helping them discover. I always felt guilty for having been an absent mother, for letting depression steal so many precious moments. But today, seeing how you transformed our story of pain into something so beautiful and meaningful, I realized that perhaps everything happened exactly as it should have. Your grandmother used to say that some people are born with a special gift, not just to see beauty, but to help others find it in themselves. You have that gift, daughter, and now finally I'm ready to rediscover mine. Hannah kept the note close to her heart, feeling as if a very old circle was finally closing. She looked around the room, at people immersed in their creations, at her mother helping a child with her painting, at Eric who observed her with love and pride. In that moment she knew with certainty she wasn't just continuing her grandmother's story or healing the wounds of her own childhood. She was creating something new, something that transcended generations and touched the deepest essence of what it means to be human, the capacity to transform pain into beauty, loneliness into connection, fear into colors. 6 months passed since the inauguration of the art therapy studio. The space, which had begun as a small project in a local library, had transformed into a vibrant center of creativity and healing. The walls, once empty, now told hundreds of stories through paintings, drawings, and collages created by the participants. Hannah was in her office, finalizing the last illustrations of the 7th book in the series, when Sarah entered, carrying an expression that mixed excitement and nervousness. "Hannah," she began, sitting in the chair in front of the desk, "I just received a call from London. The International Children's Literature Award Committee wants to include your Colors in Water series in this year's selection." The news caught Hannah by surprise. The first 6 books had been published over the last few months, each receiving more attention than the previous one. But international recognition was something she had never imagined. "There's more," continued Sarah, her smile widening. "They don't just want the books. They want to document the entire art therapy project. They think you've created a model that can be replicated in libraries and cultural centers around the world." Hannah stood up and walked to the office window, observing the movement in the studio across the hallway. One of her first students, Anna, was now helping conduct sessions for younger children. Her mother had become a constant presence, coordinating an art therapy group for adults struggling with depression. "You know what's most incredible?" said Hannah, turning to Sarah. "Each person who passes through that door brings their own story of pain, but also takes with them the possibility of transformation. It's as if each drop of color we add to the world creates waves that reach places we never imagined." That afternoon, during one of the sessions, Hannah received another surprise. An elderly lady entered the studio, supported by a cane decorated with colorful ribbons. It was Marie Ellen, one of her grandmother's former students. "I saw the report about your work in the newspaper," she said, her eyes shining with contained tears. "The photographs, the colors, everything reminded me so much of your grandmother's classes. She had this gift, you know, of making us believe that each brushstroke was a form of self-love." Marie Ellen opened her purse and took out a yellowed envelope. "I found this a few days ago, organizing old things. I think now I know why I kept it for so long." Inside the envelope was a black and white photo, but what caught Hannah's attention was a folded piece of paper that fell when she opened the photograph. It was a letter from her grandmother, never sent, dated a few days before her departure. "Dear Hannah, as I write this letter, you are still just a promise in your mother's womb, but something inside me knows, with that certainty that only the heart possesses, that you will be the person who will continue this story of colors and healing. So I've spent my life trying to show people that art isn't just about creating beauty, but about finding light even in the darkest places. Now, I feel that my time is coming to an end, but I'm not afraid. Because I know that you, my little artist not yet born, will find your own way to the water." When that happens, when you finally discover the colors that live inside you, remember, each person carries an ocean of possibilities. Some oceans are calm, others stormy. Some are deep and dark, others clear and crystalline. But all, without exception, hold treasures waiting to be discovered. Keep swimming, my darling. Keep painting. Keep believing that art can heal broken hearts and reconnect lost souls. And mainly, keep showing the world that it's never too late to learn to float. With all my love and all the colors of the sea, Grandma. Amelia. Hannah held the letter against her chest, feeling as if a very old circle was finally completing itself. Eric, who had arrived silently during the reading, placed his hands on her shoulders, offering silent support. She knew, whispered Hannah, tears freely running down her face. Somehow, she always knew. Marie Ellen smiled gently. Your grandmother used to say that some stories are like waves. They need to recede to gain strength before reaching the shore. Perhaps your story needed that time, that specific path, to touch so many hearts. The launch of the 7th and final book of the Colors in Water series happened on a special afternoon at the Art Therapy Studio. The space had been transformed into a living gallery, with walls covered not just by the original illustrations of the books, but also by works created by project participants throughout the last year. Hannah was radiant in an ocean blue dress, the same color that had so frightened her in the Maldives and that now represented her own transformation. Beside her, her mother proudly displayed her own paintings in a special corner of the exhibition, a series called Rebirth in Watercolor. The event gathered people from all parts of her journey. Lisa, the swimming instructor from the Maldives, had traveled especially to be present. Richard, the retired editor who first believed in her potential, chatted animatedly with other professionals from the publishing market. Sarah, now more than an editor, a dear friend, coordinated the last details of the live transmission that would allow people from all over the world to participate in the moment. Eric observed everything with a serene smile, remembering that first night at the Obsidian restaurant, when he met a woman who could barely raise her eyes from the napkin. The transformation was almost unbelievable, but at the same time it seemed that Hannah had always been this person, strong, creative, capable of touching lives with her art. She just needed to discover it for herself. In the center of the studio, a special installation drew attention. 7 glass panels, each representing a color of the rainbow, created a corridor of light and color when traversed by the afternoon sun. It was a tribute to her grandmother, an artistic recreation of that first book that had saved Amanda's mother so many years ago. It's time, whispered Sarah, indicating that the moment for the speech had arrived. Hannah walked to the center of the space, her heart beating in a tranquil rhythm that she could never have imagined possible a year ago. She looked at the faces around her, each of them part of her story, each carrying their own colors and stories of transformation. When I began this journey, she started, her voice clear and confident, I thought I was just writing children's books, but I discovered that I was rewriting my own story, and in the process I learned that each of us carries an ocean within, an ocean of possibilities, of colors, of stories waiting to be told. She paused, her eyes meeting those of her mother, who smiled through tears. My grandmother used to say that art isn't just about creating beauty, but about creating bridges. Bridges between past and future, between pain and healing, between hearts that thought themselves alone. Today, looking at all of you, I see that she was right. Each brushstroke, each word, each color we share is a bridge for someone. Hannah walked to the central panel, where an enlarged reproduction of her grandmother's letter was displayed. This last book is different from the others. It's not just a story about seeing colors in water. It's a story about how all our stories are connected, how each drop of color we add to the world creates waves that reach places we never imagined. At this moment, the children from the Art Therapy Project began to distribute small glass vials containing colored water to all present. Each of these vials contains a different color, explained Hannah, just as each of us carries a unique story. But when we join our colors, when we share our stories, we create something greater than ourselves. At her signal, Everyone opened their vials and poured the contents into a large glass structure in the center of the space. The colors mixed, creating hypnotic patterns that reminded of the Maldivian waters. "This is just the beginning," concluded Hannah, her voice laden with emotion and hope, because as long as there are people willing to dive into their own stories, to transform pain into art, to share their colors with the world, there will always be possibility for healing, for transformation, for rebirth. Eric approached, enveloping her in a loving embrace. In the back of the studio, through the large windows, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with the same colors that now danced in the water of the installation. Hannah looked at that spectacle of light and color, at the people who filled the space, at the books that told not just her story, but the story of so many other people who had found healing through art. And she knew with a deep and tranquil certainty that she had finally found her